All right, I've been asked to say a few words about unpaid internships. I'm going to use this opportunity to sketch out a very high-level picture about the nature and scope of unpaid internships. We're going to cover 4 areas rather quickly: framing unpaid internships as precarious work, exploring the growing threat of internships within the labor market, how we got to this juncture, and finally a few strategies that can be used to contest unpaid internships within the labor market. So what are unpaid internships? Unpaid internships are a form of precarious work. York University Professor Leah Bosco defines precarious employment as work for remuneration characterized by uncertainty, low income, limited social benefits, and statutory entitlements. Unpaid interns are often placed at risk due to their nebulous employment status, their type of employment, and the social location and social context that they exist in. Now, originally, unpaid internships were a variation on the American version of the apprentice model. They first appeared in the medical fields in the late 19th century and eventually moved into a limited number of white-collar fields in the post-World War II era. Largely unpaid, elite, male-dominated, and of limited duration, these positions were talent pipelines into the worlds of politics, medicine, and public administration. And I should note, into a paid job. Contrast this with today, where there's no standard definition of what an internship is. It is clear that most interns perform work that is vital to the operation and success of the organizations that they are attached to. These schemes are extremely diverse in structure and have almost endless formulations. Most commonly, internships are used as a form of vocational training or pre-employment vetting for post-secondary students and recent graduates. Now, while the internships typical of the mid-20th century generally led to paid jobs, the internships of today are pay to play. Pre-jobs, or pre-entry-level positions where people are essentially paying to do productive work that would normally be paid for. Interns today are providing their labor for free, or even more incredibly, paying for the opportunity to complete an internship. It should be explicitly stated from the outset that unpaid internships aren't simply an issue that impacts youth. Rather, this type of employment is something that's being experienced by workers in their late 20s and early 30s, recent immigrants, workers switching careers, and older workers. While my current research focuses on young workers, I'm cognizant of the impact on other workers, and I'm planning to comment on these other areas in the near future. So unpaid internships, a growing threat within the labor market. Unpaid internships have largely gone unnoticed until very recently, with very little being written about it. A massive violation of employment standards hiding in plain sight. Simply put, the rapid rise of unpaid internships is one of the greatest threats to the labor markets in Canada and many other advanced economies. So let's explore some of the impacts arising from the intern craze. Internships have become a rite of passage for post-secondary students, be it those in journalism, public relations, finance, medical sciences, architecture, entertainment, or theater. There's evidence of the prevalence of these schemes in most sectors of the economy. In the absence of statistics, my best guess places a number of illegal unpaid internships occurring in Canada every year at somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000. These are violations that are tacitly supported by corporations, post-secondary institutions, professional associations, and the government. These are misclassified employees who are illegally denied key social minimums normally guaranteed through the floor of rights: the minimum wage, overtime pay, access to EI, vacation pay, and CPP contributions. Rights made inaccessible due to widespread misclassification, next to no enforcement action, lack of knowledge regarding rights, and a profound absence of leadership from key institutions in responding to changes brought on by globalization, technology, and changing demographics. Each year, unpaid interns displace tens of thousands of white-collar jobs, which has a caustic effect within the wider labor market, where workers compete for fewer jobs, wages are driven down, and precarious work becomes further normalized. This progressive devaluing of paid labor reflects a wider trend within the labor market towards the creation of a flexible labor markets in Canada and a growing precarity. Unpaid internships have a perverse impact on the wider socioeconomic health of young Canadians by reducing social mobility, discriminating against young women, racialized youth, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who are entering the labor market. Unpaid internships place all the risk onto the intern, forcing students and recent graduates to incur higher levels of private debt, privatizing labor costs for employers onto young workers and their families, forcing young people to live with their parents well into adulthood, and impacting on demographics by reducing the birth rate, household formation, and the number of marriages and common law relationships. So how did we get here? A proper contextualization of unpaid internships requires a close survey of what's been happening in society over the past 30 years. Furthermore, it's key to situate the importance of this matter by remembering this issue is about who should be investing in young people and how you move students from education into the workforce. This responsibility for the rise of unpaid internships lies in a complex interplay between the architecture of neoliberalism, demographics, a refusal to breathe new life into notions of intergenerational equity, and an ignorance about the changing dynamics at play within the labor market. Amid an environment that privileges privatization, commodification, deregulation, and hyper-individualism, we've departed from a society that supports social investment, a strong education system, and the maintenance of the social contract. Consider the recent attacks on young people within Canadian society, be it the retrenchment of the social contract by the Conservative governments, by telling young people that they have to accept less, whether it be in pensions, the closure of student job centres, or explicit support for two-tier entitlement systems. At the provincial level, you have McGuinty's Liberal government outselling a structural adjustment program targeting the post-secondary education system, which is pushing unpaid work on students as a key reform, and unsustainable levels of student debt are necessary. Unpaid internships must be located as but one failure within a wider attack on youth in society, a theme that's replicated around the world. Consider the war on drugs, the ever-present law and order agenda, the normalization of racial profiling, and secret draconian laws targeting young citizens who would dare question the prevailing neoliberal order. On this point, I offer up Law 78 with the G20 regulations. I'd suggest that what we're seeing here is a wider strategic abandonment of young people within Canada and around many jurisdictions in the world. Within the context of the labor market, this means an explicit attack on the next generation of workers through attacks on organized labor via anti-union laws, the creation of flexible labor markets, moving towards deregulation, the rusting of workplace laws, and regulatory stagnation that fails to respond to the changes within the economy from globalization, technology, and demographics. So in response to the neoliberal order, we're seeing a growing resistance from below around the globe led by young people. Consider the Maple Spring, Spain's Indignidos, the Occupy movement, Chile's student movement, or Greece's anti-austerity protests. We're beginning to see a widespread questioning of the notions of citizenship, how government institutions are structured, the level of corporate influence at the national and transnational level, and whether the current neoliberal primacy is an appropriate model going forward. So what can be done? What I've said in the foregoing has been depressing, so let's end on a positive note. What can be done? In closing, I'm briefly going to touch on 2 points. Some specific actions that can be taken to address unpaid internships domestically via reorienting the role of government. And second, the need for an articulation of a wider agenda that addresses the growing precarity within society. Recently, I wrote a submission to the Law Commission of Ontario for their project on vulnerable workers and precarious work. It had a narrow focus on unpaid internships. While the specific recommendations have an Ontario bent to them, the overall thrust could work in any jurisdiction that wanted to take concrete steps. I proposed a 5-pronged approach aimed at stabilizing the youth labor market. This includes a statutory review to assess whether the current provisions are adequate and whether reforms are necessary, building organizational capacity within the apparatus of government to provide the infrastructure necessary to understand and respond to youth labor markets, incentivizing compliance in high-risk industries that have historically exploited unpaid labor, and acting a proactive enforcement strategy to secure the flow of rights, and data collection so that appropriate decisions can be made so we understand what's occurring. There literally is no statistics on unpaid internships. So it's very difficult for government or an academic like myself to comment on this in any meaningful way without knowing the scope of it. So I think that's a big start, because we literally do not know what's happening in the labor market. Unpaid internships can't be addressed in isolation. This means that this isn't simply a concern of workplace laws. Rather, a fix requires a reorientation about how governments manage the school-to-work transition beyond simply focusing on supply-side issues towards a model that deploys ameliorative public policy aimed at raising and maintaining the floor of rights, and one that considers demand-side issues and properly supports our young citizens. Finally, progressive forces within society must begin to articulate an agenda aimed at addressing the profound insecurity, precarity, and fear that exists at present. This agenda must be premised on egalitarian principles aimed at social justice, reducing income inequality, and an inclusive equality that values every person. It is necessary to create an environment where a life of dignity and security is possible for everyone. This isn't just a question of creating jobs or economic growth. Rather, it includes a redistribution of income, control of time and the wider labor process, and the creation of secure conditions within people's lives. Thanks. That's all I have for now.